Welcome back to Moby Motion. It's great to have you. Now you might have noticed that recently I've been posting a lot more videos. There are some weeks where I post 16 videos or more, and on average that's more than 2 videos every single day. And when a single project can take over 12 terabytes of space, you can only imagine how much capacity I chew through. It's not just raw capacity. I have these 2 very powerful computers with good CPUs and GPUs, and it's really tricky to simulate something on one computer and then render it on the other because that GPU might be free. And so I wanted to see if I could solve all of my storage woes with a NAS, and that stands for Network Attached Storage. Specifically, I wanted to see if a NAS would allow me to create one shared folder that 2 computers can render to at the same time without any performance hit. I wanted to see if 2 computers or more could simulate directly to the NAS. I wanted to see if I could completely ditch Google Drive, and I wanted to run many more tests. Before we jump in, some disclosures right off the bat. I initially reached out to Asustor and asked them if they'd send me this NAS because I really wanted to have a play with it. They have very kindly sent one over and I don't have to send it back. But no money changed hands, and they have no editorial control over this video, so I can and will share everything I found, which I think you might want to know if you are looking into this NAS. Also, I've had to buy all the other hardware, which includes drives, cables, NICs, UPS, everything else, you name it. What they have asked me though, and I think this is reasonable, is that if I find anything negative about the device, I share this with them so that they can improve and so they can address it. Maybe some things are user error. So at the end of the video, when I talk about the downsides of this NAS, I'll also be sharing their responses to some of my points. With that out of the way, let's unbox the NAS and have a look at the other hardware that I'm going to use to make it work. So here is the packaging that it comes in. Opens up easily at the top. And you get this box of accessories. Power cable. And these comes with 4 Ethernet cables, and these are all Cat6 cables. It also comes with little screws. There are some big screws for hard drives and smaller screws that you can use for SSDs. And at the bottom of the accessory box, there is a little quick start guide. Now let's have a look at the NAS itself. Now the first thing that stood out to me was how heavy this thing is. It feels incredibly well built and very rugged. At the front you'll see a power button, power LED that's going to light up blue, and a system status LED. There are more indicator lights. These are indicators for the 10 gigabit and 5 gigabit connections. There's also a USB port which you can press, and this button is user assignable, so you can decide what kind of backup is done when you press that button. On the top right there is a screen, which is actually very handy when you first set this up because it shows you the IP address that you can connect to. There are some buttons on the top right that help you interact with this LCD display screen. And then the star of the show are the 6 3.5-inch hard drive bays. Now these are built well, they have nice green LEDs, they have a little lock on the front so you can lock the drives in place, but they do require hard drives to be put in with screws. I do wish they were toolless. That would make inserting and removing drives a little bit easier. Now here are the sides of the device. And here is the back where all of the magic happens. On the top left, there is the power cord, and in the center is an exhaust fan. Now on the top right, there is a tiny little expansion port that allows you to put in specific PCIe accessories and have them accessible there. But let's look at these ports, because these are what really sets apart this NAS from other devices on the market. At the top, there are 2 USB 4 ports. Now at the moment, these can't be used for networking, so you can't use them to plug into your computer and access the NAS using blazing USB 4 speeds. But actually, NAS Compares has been able to do this, and Asustor say that this is currently a limitation of AMD drivers because of the CPU that's in here. So I really hope that sometime in the future they open this feature back up and you can use these ports for blazing fast connection to your computers. But it's not like it's slow without them anyway. Underneath these, you'll see two 10 gigabit Ethernet ports. And if that wasn't enough, there are also two 5 gigabit Ethernet ports. And there are USB ports that you can use for a UPS or like a Wi-Fi antenna or something. And these both run at USB 3.2 Gen 2. Now let's fill up this thing with drives and talk about the other kind of accessories that I've needed to buy, all with my own money, to make this work to its full potential. For the 6 hard drive bays at the front, I am going to use 6 22 terabyte Toshiba drives. That's right, 22 terabytes each. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like a specific review of these hard drives, because I don't see much love for them on YouTube, but they are fantastic drives. And I've even bought more than these 6 for research during my PhD. Now, if I undo the 3 screws at the back, you'll see that the metal cover comes off. You have to slide it backwards a little bit first, and that reveals the insides. And right at the top, you'll see 4 slots for M.2 drives. And on the side, you'll see a little flap that you can use to insert a second stick of RAM. Now, if you disassemble it completely, you can also switch out the first stick of RAM that's already in there. But it's nice that you can add a second stick without taking it apart further, because I think most users, even myself, I'm not too keen to take it apart more than I have already. Now take note, the first drives I tried to put in were the Lexar NM790s with heatsinks, because weirdly they were cheaper on Amazon during a sale. But actually, even though one of them fits, and they can fit if they're not next to each other, the heatsink adds just like a millimeter of width or something very tiny, but it means that you can't have 2 of them side by side. And unfortunately, this meant I had to return these drives and buy the same drives without the heatsink, because I messaged Lexar and they said I can't remove the heatsinks without voiding the warranty. But that's fine. Inserted the brand new NM790s without heatsinks, and I put the thing back together. And now I wanted to make sure that I was getting the full 10 gigabit speeds on my 2 fast computers. So I've got 2 dual 10 gigabit NICs, one for each computer. I'll have the exact name and model number on the screen. Now I also needed some slightly longer cables than the ones that come with the NAS. And also I must have misread something, because I thought that Cat6 wasn't enough for 10 gigabit, but Googling it now, it seems like it is fine. So maybe I didn't have to buy these, but I did end up buying some fast Cat8 cables from Ugreen. And these are very long and they're braided and they're very high quality. And I've used them to connect both computers directly to the NAS. And I also used a third cable to connect the computer to the other computer directly over 10 gigabit. So that when I compare the NAS with Windows storage spaces, it's a very fair like-for-like comparison. I also bought a Wi-Fi antenna so that I can connect the NAS to my network. Unfortunately, I don't have Ethernet from my router to this room. I also bought a UPS from Eaton, which is plugged into the back of the NAS, so that if I suffer some kind of power failure, the NAS can power off itself safely and securely without risking your data. Now, I had to initialize the NAS 4 times, I believe. That's partly to run my own tests on different RAID configurations and different migrations and performance with different numbers of drives. I'm not going to bore you with all of that today, but if you would like a detailed comparison of like the speed of different numbers of drives, or if you want to know how long it takes to do a RAID sync or a RAID migration using 22 terabyte drives, let me know all the questions you have in the comments below. But what I will say is this: there are actually 2 different ways to initialize it. When you first power it on, as long as there are drives in there, the little LCD screen will say initialize NAS, and you can press yes to initialize it. I would recommend not doing this because you lose a lot of control about how you set up your drives. If you want any control whatsoever, I'd recommend, instead of that, using the Asustor control center on your computer. To find the NAS, you can double click it, and then you can use the web interface to have a lot more control over how you set things up. Even though you have a lot of control, this was perfectly easy. A lot of the options were self-explanatory. I did want to use Btrfs. I wish that was the default. One time I initialized it in ext4 by accident because I hadn't realized that you have to change it on an earlier screen. That's okay. Once you've chosen all your settings and clicked initialize, it is very quick to initialize and get ready to go. Once you get into ADM, it asks you a couple of questions to initialize it. For example, which port you'd like to use. I changed it from the default port to a very obscure one just for security. So if someone's trying to hack into this thing, it's not going to be on the default port. They're going to have to hack the username and the password, and they're going to have to find the port number. Once you've done that, there's a tutorial that you can choose to go through or to skip. And it talks you through some of the basic functions like creating a shared folder and creating a user account that can access that shared folder. Now let's get to the good stuff. How is this thing as a Blender little storage server for handling all of your enormous simulation and render files? First, let's look at read-write performance. In summary, it is blazing fast. So I did have to enable jumbo frames on my computer and increase the setting to 9K, and also increase the setting to 9K on the NAS. But as soon as I did that, I was able to saturate the 10 gigabit connection in Crystal Disk Mark. And I'll also show on screen the blazing fast benchmark results in Blackmagic, a disk speed test, and also some real world file transfers. Some of these are one enormous file, and some of these are a huge number of smaller files. What I found really impressive is that it can also get these 10 gigabit speeds. That's like 1.24 gigabytes per second. And it can get those speeds using the spinning drives without a cache. I also ran some tests to compare this with Windows storage spaces, which is what I was using as a fake kind of NAS beforehand, and it's insanely faster. So the NAS over the network is faster than Windows storage spaces on the computer itself that's hosting them. And then when I ran some fair tests, so NAS over the 10 gig network versus storage spaces over a 10 gig wired network, it was also way faster. So the NAS was able to get 700 megabytes per second versus about 200 only for Windows storage spaces. And this is a very fair comparison. So this is 2 drives in a mirror in Windows storage spaces, and it's only 2 drives in the NAS in RAID 1, which acts very similarly. They're both using the exact same NIC, the same cable, and they both had jumbo frames disabled, and that might be why the NAS wasn't even faster. And when you look at the other features like RAID migrations, future-proofing, it only extends its lead over Windows storage spaces. So what can it do for real-world Blender workflow? Well, it passed all of these tests with flying colors. One of the first things I wanted to see is whether 2 computers could render a single project to the same output folder. I have an old tutorial with a terrible thumbnail that shows you how to use placeholders to combine computers into a render farm. Now, at the time I used Google Drive, but there are actually some problems with Google Drive, and I wanted to see if this gets around them. Video coming up soon that deep dives into this. But in short, yes, you can. You can have 2 computers sharing a shared folder on this NAS. They can both be reading and writing to the same shared folder. So you don't have to copy files between computers. You can have one blend file that you open on both computers, rendering to the same location. You can enable placeholders, disable overwrite, and they'll act like an impromptu render farm. And they'll both render the project and get through it much faster. Now, the second Blender question I had is, can I simulate directly to the NAS? If you've tried to use flip fluids in Google Drive and simulate to Google Drive, you might have noticed that it just crashes. It just gives you an error and it doesn't work at all. Even the simulation engines that do work in Google Drive, like Molecular Plus, they can have terrible performance. And I think it's because of upload-download speeds from Google Drive and little bits of latency. But the short answer is you can simulate directly to the NAS. And again, the performance is mind-boggling. So there are times where I've had both computers simulating big flip fluid simulations directly to the NAS, and each computer has been simulating 7 simulations and has kept up with it like it's no problem. Okay, the NAS became a tiny bit less responsive, like opening the file took a few more seconds, scrubbing through the timeline took longer when there were 14 simulations running at once, but there was no appreciable slowdown to the simulation process. So this is anecdotal. I haven't measured this very scientifically, but it felt like the same speed as if I was simulating to a local disk on the computers. And it has the huge advantage that I don't have to copy files from one computer to another. So when the simulation is done, it's already accessible to both of them. It's even possible to have one computer actively simulating a flip fluid simulation, and even while the simulation is happening, the other computer was able to render it. And this all stays in one folder. So no copying files over, no constantly deleting files from the computer to make room so I can copy it, no worrying about multiple versions of the same project or which one's more up to date. It just works. It's just this magical folder with as much capacity as you want, really, that is redundant, is really fast access, and multiple computers can render to and simulate to, and it's like entirely changed my workflows. I also wanted to see whether you can use a fast Ethernet cable to directly plug in your computer to the NAS and get the full 10 gigabit speeds that the NIC and the NAS are capable of, and the answer is yes. All you have to do is be mindful of the IP address. So if it's connected, let's say, to Wi-Fi, it might give you one specific IP address that you can use to access it over Wi-Fi. So each Ethernet port has its own IP address. So if you plug a cable into the NAS and into the computer, you'll be able to connect to the NAS both ways. One way will be over Wi-Fi and one way will be over Ethernet. And obviously you should connect over Ethernet because it's going to be so much faster. All you have to do is make sure you connect to the right IP address. Sometimes Asustor Control Center will only show you one of them, so you might have to get creative about how you find out this other IP address. In the screen, you can scroll through the settings and it'll tell you the IP address of each different port. So you can use that to find the exact IP address. Then on your computer, even if you can't see it in the control center, open up a browser, go to the Ethernet IP address / your port number, and you'll see the login screen. You can use it straight away. And you can also use the IP address to access SMB shares. So when you're telling Windows to mount a shared folder as a network folder on Windows or any operating system, again, you can specify the fast Ethernet port and get enormous speeds. Like I said earlier, even with spinning drives in RAID 6, which isn't known for speed, this machine can saturate the 10 gigabit speed. So you can get full 10 gigabit purely with spinning drives without any NVMe cache at all. I also wanted to see whether this would allow me to completely ditch Google Drive. Now, I haven't been able to quite yet, but slowly I'm phasing it in, and I'm hopeful that one day soon, in the next few months, I will be able to completely ditch Google Drive, or at least drastically reduce the amount of money that I'm spending on it. The main problem that I have now that Google Drive solves, but the NAS doesn't, is upload speeds. And that's not the NAS hardware's fault at all. It's a problem with our internet provider, and they can only provide us a line with 100 megabit upload speed. they physically don't offer a package with faster upload speeds. And this is made slightly more complicated by the fact that the NAS and my computers are very far away from the router, and there's no direct Ethernet cable from the router to here. And so the communication between here and the internet is even slower than 100 megabit. And so this is a problem when my editor, say hi to him again in the comments below, Madhuwantha, he's much more than an editor, he produces some of my videos. So this is a problem when he wants to download files off the NAS, because then the NAS has to upload it to the internet, has to go to him in Sri Lanka, and he has to be able to download it. At the moment, that is still much slower than Google Drive, and so we're still using Google Drive. But as soon as I sort this out, I will be able to rely on it much more heavily. But anyway, this is a thing that I'm working on, and I'm hoping that soon I will be able to ditch Google Drive completely. Now, I also wanted to test the NAS in terms of future-proofing and expandability. Specifically, I had a problem with Windows storage spaces, which is that I initially set it up with 2 drives in a mirror, which is like a RAID 1, and I wanted to add drives, and it will let you add drives, so you can add a 3rd drive and a 4th drive. But the problem is that it stays in this mirror, and so you lose half of the capacity no matter how many drives you have. And also, even though you have like 4 drives mirrored, you only have 1 drive of redundancy. If you lose 2 drives, even though in theory each bit of data is on 2 drives, it doesn't work as nicely as you think it will, so you don't have 2 drives of redundancy. Now the problem is that you can't change the redundancy type on Windows storage spaces. So if you end up with 10 drives, you're still stuck with whatever you started with, which for me was a mirror. Now the really nice thing about NASes, such as the Lockerstor Gen 3, is that you can do RAID migrations. And I've tested this. So you can start with 2 drives in RAID 1, you can add a 3rd drive and then go from RAID 1 to RAID 5. You can add tons more drives, so you go from 3 drives to 6, and then you can go from RAID 5 to RAID 6. Incredibly easy to use and to set up in the UI, but it's really slow. So I was just doing this for testing purposes because I thought it was kind of fun, but I wouldn't recommend doing this if you can avoid it, because it's incredibly slow. So a RAID migration might take 3 days for a 22 terabyte drive. So I'd recommend filling it with as many drives as you plan to and initializing it with that. Don't initialize with some and then add them soon if you know they're going to be added soon. A quick note about Plex. Now people tell you don't buy this NAS for Plex because there's no hardware transcoding, and that's true. But weirdly, the website for this has a little Plex logo and it says it's great for Plex. So I was curious how it would work, and I've downloaded it and streamed some things to test it out. What I'll say is the Plex app that's already available in their App Store, App Central, it's an old version. So if you download it from App Central and then you try to use your Plex server from a different device, it'll say you have an unsupported version and you'll have to download it and install it from the file, which isn't that difficult, but it's kind of annoying. But anyway, you can stream stuff, no problem. The only problem is if you've downloaded something in, let's say 4K, and you want to stream it in 1080p, if you try to do that live in the app, it won't play at all. Like, it's not capable of software transcoding in real time, at least in my tests. But what you can do is make Plex transcode these files in the background. Okay, it might take like a couple of hours, but it can happen in the background. And so when you go to watch this content, let's say in a week, you'll have the transcoded version ready to go and you can play that already transcoded version. So it's not a great Plex media server. I wouldn't buy it for that primary purpose. But if your main use of this is, let's say, Blender or a small medium-sized business, and you want it to be able to do Plex rarely once in a month, it's not terrible. The only problem with my little plan, I think, is a bug in Plex. So you can ask Plex to automatically transcode anything that's added to your library. And so in theory, that's great. Whenever you add something, it'll transcode it in the background. It'll make like a version for TV and a version for mobile. You can play those. But Plex seems to be having a problem with this. It seems to transcode one thing and then stop. And then lots of people on the internet have experienced the same issue. So I'm hoping that is just a bug on the Plex side, which is fixed soon. So this device has massively improved my workflow. By having one central location that can be used for simulating, rendering, and is accessed by my editor as well internationally, it's allowed me to produce videos with so much less friction. But not everything was good, so let's talk about the things that I didn't like about this device. Probably the biggest for a lot of people is the price. So this is not a cheap device. Here in the UK is about £1,400. Prices that I've seen in the US are about $1,500, but I wouldn't be surprised if these rise with tariffs, if they haven't already since in the time that I've been making this video. What justifies this price, at least I think in the eyes of Asustor, is that this device is so unique, and it offers a combination of features that are just impossible to get with other devices. So as far as I'm aware, there is no other turnkey NAS solution with 6 bays and 4 NVMEs, built-in dual 10 gig Ethernet, so copper, really easy to wire up to your computer, and dual 5 gigabit and dual USB 4. There's just nothing else quite like it on the market. So if this is within your budget, it is an incredible device and you will be very happy with it. But if this device is just outside of your budget, then you do have to look at other devices, and there are some options, but you have to give up some of these features that make this device so good. So for example, you could look at the 6-bay Ugreen. Now this comes in much cheaper, but you have to give up 2 of the M.2s. And the operating system is much newer, so it's less tried and tested. If you're prepared to install your own OS, then there's a really compelling upcoming NAS by Asustor. I have no idea how to pronounce that. It's called the WTR Max, I believe. So they're selling this as an 11-bay NAS. It's actually 6 bays of hard drives plus 5 M.2s. But the downsides here, it does have 10 gig, but it's 10 gig SFP plus. So you need special cables or converters to go from SFP plus to Ethernet, and you have to install your own operating system. But when I shared this with Asustor, they said something which I'm not sure if I can mention here or not. What I'll say is this: if you're interested in this device, but the price is a deal breaker, keep an eye out for an announcement from Asustor at Computex, which is just in a couple of days now. Moving on to other negatives. Now I have been able to set up a read-write cache using 2 M.2 SSDs, and it makes fluid simulations feel really responsive. So this is very subjective, very anecdotal, but when I move around in the timeline of an enormous fluid simulation with this read-write cache, it feels as if I had an SSD pool, which I also tried separately. But there are issues with SSD caching. So if you go on the Asustor subreddit, people will talk about problems they've had. I'm just going to share the SSD caching problems I've had. The first time I tried to set up an SSD read-write cache, the hard drives were carrying out a RAID operation, and there's nothing in the documentation or in the UI to say that you can't build an SSD cache while a RAID operation is happening. I believe it was adding a drive. I believe I was going from 2 drives to 3 drives, but some kind of similar RAID operation. But I had lots of problems. From memory, I think it was disconnecting very frequently. The device may have even restarted itself, or the network shares became inaccessible. But anyway, I decided to give up on the SSD cache and wait for the RAID operation to finish. Once the RAID operation finished, I was able to add it more smoothly. And I've shared this, and they are investigating this issue. But I had another issue with SSD caching. Later, once all of the RAID operations were finished, and I then created a read-write cache, there were still issues. So the progress said it was stuck at 0% for many hours, and even the next day it still said 0%. But what's really weird is during this time, subjectively again, it felt like it became more responsive. But then when I restarted the device, the cache was already there and set up normally, and it said good, and it was telling me the cache hit rate and all of this stuff. So I suspect that something under the hood actually added the read-write cache, but the UI didn't update. And again, I've shared this and they're looking into it. Next point, it would be nice if this device had some hardware encoding. This isn't a deal breaker for me, so I'm not going to install TrueNAS. I'm not a heavy Plex user. I've only installed it for testing for this video, but it would be a nice to have, especially as some of the other devices at this price range or even cheaper do have that feature. Next is ADM. Now ADM is incredibly powerful. It has tons of features, and it was the first NAS operating system that I ever used. I was perfectly happy creating users, shared folders. The walkthrough guide at the beginning is very handy, but the issue is that since I've used this, I've used a Synology as well with DSM, and I see how much nicer and more polished that is. If you'd be interested in a pure software comparison, Asustor versus Synology, let me know in the comments down below. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but there is just a tiny little bit more friction in ADM when you're doing simple things. It is lacking a level of polish. It has like 70 to 80% of the features that Synology offers, especially if you're looking at the core features that everyone uses. But there are certain things that are lacking, and the whole thing is slightly harder to use. And that is something you should be aware of. But if we're going to be completely fair to Asustor, they do some specific things better than Synology. And one example, which I found, they haven't shared this with me, Asustor will let you look at the smart data for a drive. It's the most simple thing. In the UI, you want to be able to look at the hours viewed, if there are any bad sectors, how many bad sectors, are they increasing? But Synology hides this from users. So to get this, you have to SSH into the NAS and use the command line to look at the smart data. Asustor shows you it, and that's great. Now this next downside, not necessarily Asustor's fault, partly comes down to AMD drivers being lacking, but it's those dual 40 gigabit USB 4 ports. It would be really nice if you could use them to network with the device. Now a YouTube channel by the name of NAS Compares was able to get networking running with this device at 40 gigabit using USB 4, but users had issues with it, and it seems like they've removed this feature while they polish it off and while they're waiting for AMD drivers, and I hope they reintroduce it soon. But it's a shame to have these ports and have them so limited. So you can use them to interface with external hard drive enclosures like JBODs or expansion drives, but it's a shame you can't use it for networking just yet. I'm going to be keeping a close eye on this for when they add support back in, hopefully soon. So next negative is at least partly user error from my side, but at least partly error from the device itself and the software. So I was trying to add drives. So I think I had 4 Toshiba drives. They were already in an array. There was 2 SSDs, but one of them turned out to be dodgy, so I wasn't going to use it. And the other one was like only 200 gig. So I was going to remove those SSDs and replace them with the 5th and 6th Toshiba 22 terabyte. But the issue is that when I removed them and added the Toshibas, they didn't show up. It still thought it was the old drives. And that seemed like a really simple fix. Like I didn't know why I couldn't press a refresh button or something. That documentation said, oh, if it's not showing a drive, you have to restart the device. But I thought I was being clever. I SSH'd in, which is very dangerous. This is going to be a cautionary tale of why you shouldn't SSH unless you're very sure what you're doing. But I SSH'd in. I asked ChatGPT for safe commands that help show these drives back up. It gave me some commands that help refresh the device list, and I ran them, but it still didn't work. So I had to restart the machine. The problem is that when I restarted the machine, the primary volume was inaccessible. So something that I had done in SSH had made the volume inaccessible. Now, okay, that's my fault, but the drives should show up. If you remove a drive, it should know that it's gone. And then when you add a drive back in, and I did wait like many minutes, at least 5-10 minutes, the drives should really show up. Or at the very least, there should be like a refresh button so that the OS does it in a safe way without messing up your volume. On a related note, now I was able to recover my data by SSHing back in, manually assembling the volume, because under the hood it uses an open source library, MDADM, which I want to call MDADM, but I'm not sure if anyone does that. So I was able to recover this data. But another point that they could improve is it would be really nice if the MDADM documentation was better. So if Asustor told us what they're doing under the hood to interface with MDADM, so that if and when people mess up their volumes, there is like official documentation on how to recover the data. To be fair to them, there have been Reddit threads where people mess up arrays and they reach out to support, and support is able to talk them through this, but it would be nice if there was something openly accessible on the internet. Now, a few small points on the software. It would be really nice if it came with a dedicated AI-powered image manager, something to help me move off of iCloud and to help people move away from Google Photos. Something like Image or something like you get with Ugreen's OS. But Image is looking very good, so I'm going to have a go at downloading it at some point if I get some time. And when I was on the iOS store, there was some app about photos, but I'm not sure how good it is. The reviews weren't very good. So I think the way to go, if you want to use this device as like an iCloud replacement, I think Image is the way to go. So a tiny point, and there is a positive here as well. This device offers you a huge range of ways to back up your data. So you can back up to rsync, Samba, words I don't even know. There are lots of ways to back up. It would be really nice if you could back up, but in the UI exclude different file types. So why would that be so useful for me? Well, I want my projects to be backed up, and that includes the blends and the renders. Because I have so much more capacity now, I can keep fluid simulation caches even when they're multiple terabytes. But the thing is, those aren't as vital as the blend itself. So if I'm backing up the device, I need to back up the blends. I do need to back up the renders. The caches, I can take them or leave them. So it would be really nice if the UI allowed you to do like an rsync backup, but exclude different file types. But since then, I've actually found a way to do this if you're comfortable with Portainer, crontab UI, and some very simple shell scripting. And so I have been able to back up just the important file types to a completely separate NAS. And it's even a Synology NAS. It can be any device that supports rsync. So if you want to learn about this and how I did that, leave a comment down below. Now, my last negative is actually a hardware one, which is strange because the hardware overall is just so strong. But I wish that the compatibility list for the Lockerstor Gen 3 had any 8TB drives. So it has 4TB and smaller, but 8TB drives are becoming almost affordable. Like, I'm hoping that in a year or two, I'm hoping that very soon they become affordable. And if you have 4 bays free, you can fill them up with 8TB drives for not much more than the price of 8 4TB drives, if you know what I'm saying. Other NAS manufacturers do have 8TB drives on the list, but even now these are kind of affordable. So Lexar recently launched an 8TB drive. Similarly, WD have an SN850X in 8TB, and I've seen this as low as £530, which is a real bargain. If these were compatible, I probably would have bought at least one already. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not saying this is a bad device, not by any means. I just think you have the right to know about everything I found, good and bad. For the right person, this is an incredible device. If you have the budget for it, so maybe you're a small to medium-sized business, maybe you're a content creator like myself, or maybe you're a small to medium-sized animation studio, it is incredibly difficult to beat this device. Just look at the hardware and the fact that it is a turnkey solution. You switch it on and it initializes. No messing around with TrueNAS, no messing around in the command line if you don't want to. If you have any questions about the device, let me know in the comments below. And if you want to learn how to set it up on Tailscale so that you can access it remotely and even share the device with others, check out this video. Oh, I am so bad at talking. I am so bad at talking to a camera. This is my third take of telling you how bad I am at talking to a camera.